with another video, and I wanted to talk about socionics. I was been kind of looking more at Model G and the kind of the charges of the information elements. Some people will know generally what I'm talking about. If you're curious about um, this form of socionics, you could look up um, Dr. Victor Galenko's Model G form of socionics. And I don't really know exactly um, how necessary Model G is, but there are certain ideas that I find interesting, and I thought to just talk about them and just give an illustration. And the two types I was thinking about um, parsing out the difference of potentially how a positivist type versus a negativist type. Positive Positivist types in Model G, I think, have positive charges in their ego block. So, like an ESE would have positive FE and SI, I believe. Whereas an SCI, which is their mirror, introverted form of basically the same type, would have negative SI and negative FE. And potentially just how this would, what the difference is, and you could evaluate whether or not it's significant enough to really constitute a better representation of the types. But I was just thinking about it, so I thought I'd make a video. So, because ESE, FE, SI is a positivist type, they're going to have more of a positive force on the emotional environment that they're within. They're kind of activating and exciting and supplying the um, their surroundings with a kind of enthusiasm that actually penetrates into people, right? And it's um, into people's physical internal spaces. So it's actually, you have the harmonizing element and homeostasis element of introverted sensation, but it's positive, and then you have the you have the dynamic um, external um, activating aspect of extroverted ethics. And so what it basically amounts to is, you could say, positively creating a lighthearted, fun-loving environment, um, where, also because they're alphas, where everyone gets to contribute, um, gets to vocalize what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and contribute equally to this mood. So they're the ones that actually brings the party, right? If a party is dull or it's lacking that kind of positive emotionality, ESCs will find creative ways using different elements at times, also kind of bringing in two-dimensional mobilizing any as like a supplement, as well as extroverted sensation, um, to be able to, they use extroverted sensation to kind of actually um, put things in position for that to be possible. Um, um, and yeah, so they're bringing that in the extroverted fashion. Um, whereas this is probably gonna be a short video, and I might go into more detail, but um, whereas SEIs, theoretically, according to Model G, being negativists, um, and just being introverts, they're not so much as concerned with positively creating that kind of lighthearted atmosphere, but rather removing unwanted um, and inharmonious um, moods of negativity potentially that they're basically um, what do you want to say? Trying to harmonize all the moods in the environment by limiting um, and filtering out unwanted emotional reactions. That's why they're known as kind of being the peacekeeper, because they can get into an environment and extinguish all of the excessive emotions or unwanted emotions, anger, um, uh, um, people being too contentious and too rowdy. They're the ones that would actually be removing an element from the environment um, in that way. Now, there's definitely ways to argue this from a Model A standpoint. For sure, there is. Uh, you know, someone could argue that with extroverted sensation being higher in ESEs, that they could actually push you out of the group or kind of exclude you or limit your right to speak, even though in some sense that's counterintuitive to alphas. Alphas have the complex of the closed mouth, that um, all um, opinions and beliefs and expressions shouldn't be limited. They shouldn't be just the right to speak shouldn't be limited. Alphas, after the fact, if someone has an opposing position, um, you can imagine if they're at the same table together, every person has their own particular belief or idea or uh, opinion, and everyone equally is allowed to give their piece, right? They give their side and they are represented democratically, that they represent themselves with their own right to speak freely about any topic. And then after the fact, alpha types will assess whether or not on its own merit, if it's consistent, it's sound, um, uh, and will that's why usually alpha types are more have an inclination towards debate and argumentation and more generally conversation, um, and they have a curious nature to them, so there can be, questioning and prodding and like, oh, that's interesting, what made you come to that conclusion, and they're kind of going back and forth, and um, usually one principle or idea will prevail um, out of that. Obviously the alpha NTs are the ones that are trying to push um, a kind of um, logical structure or structure of coherence, whether or not certain ideas actually make sense to incorporate into the whole picture of something. Now, you could argue again from a Model G point of view, when they get into the charges and everything, that at least with the ILEs, they would be positivists because they're NE plus and TI plus. That they're not so much as trying to remove. This actually works still with correlating that with ESC. That they're not necessarily trying to deconstruct the logic of something per se and remove unwanted logical absurdities, but rather take seemingly um, unrelated and disparate topics and phenomena and synthesize it in some fashion. That taking these pieces together and see how they fit. Right now, you could argue that if a piece doesn't fit, that it would necessitate um, logical analysis and a form of deconstructing, but someone could say that the way that they argue in that context is more of ignoring inconsistencies in favor of positive, um, either ways that it could fit paradoxically, or uh, looking more towards a solution of what actually would work to make this complete rather than focusing on what makes it not um, compatible. Like an LII, for example, being a negativist in T, having negative TI and negative NE, they would be removing um, and filtering out things that are obviously dissimilar, um, and ideas that innately don't have much potential to them. They have little promise. So LIIs are shooting down more ideas in a sense, you could argue, or at least they're shooting down structures, and they're critical towards structures because they have flexible intuition. So with the intuition, obviously, if it's contact intuition, which denotes the idea of being flexible and in a sense situational, whatever, they would be open to ideas, but they would be closed towards structuring or housing those ideas. Like, in what way will we actually categorize this phenomena? What what title or category or box does this actually have to fit in? And so they would be more openly skeptical towards structures, um, why things are defined the way that they are, what necessitates that. Is it superficial or is it actually substantial? And so they'd be more distrusting from the outset of structures and more trusting in regards to um, ideas. And you could argue that they would be, once they have tested alleged structures or axioms, you could say, that they would um, logically impose that structure in as many domains as they possibly could, and might have an enthusiasm for it, that they've actually found out some um, reason above all reasons for things. And that's where you could kind of see the excitation of alpha and T, of sharing that information and getting emotional feedback from people, like their reaction towards that seemingly profound structure that they've stumbled across. Whereas ILEs would be reverse. They would be um, this is where it gets kind of weird, because they would be positive in a sense towards ideas, but they would be stubborn and inert. So they would naturally have an inclination to see the promise in things, but be critical towards, um, to the end of whether or not what's being offered ideationally is inherently compelling, persuasive, interesting, and offers great potential. um, with a way of kind of bypassing, not even bypassing, but because they are using the creative function. So the creative function is still being used to support the base, but it's um, at a certain point, it can be semantical to try to create a structure um, first, instead of having the curiosity or have a compelling idea that necessitates you actually figuring out the foundations for it. I mean, curiosity and intrigue is what guides ILEs in any base in general. But um, And yeah, I mean, looking across many different systems, especially typology, this is where an ILE would thrive. Is, theoretically from the standpoint of Model G, but that all these different systems are actually, in some sense, tracking something objective, and they actually see something um, that's there and has a legitimate structure to it, and the ILE is trying to find a way to tether all of those findings in a coherent, all-encompassing system. Um, um, and then you can kind of see some of the extroverted logic in there too. But well, when they're systematizing and well, not systematizing, but when they're um, tinkering and trying to figure out, throwing stuff at the wall and see what comes out from it, kind of an inductive process. Um, and so, yeah, just throwing this stuff out there. I'm just curious. Now, obviously, I think there's a difference. I think Model A still has charges, but for example, I think in Model A it's NE plus and TI minus instead of NE, uh, instead because the charge I think represents the metabolic flow from the bold elements. That would be like the social mission block in Model G. That it goes from NE plus to TE minus, and it's going from one extroverted element to another extroverted element. Um, but um, but the positivism part specifically is more about, it's still moving from like N to T to S to F, but it would be N E T E S E F E. Um, wait, no, N E T E, no, NETISEFI. Sorry. Um, yeah, I don't know, just throwing stuff out there. So yeah, peace.